Hello everybody, my name is Belén Cruz-Durán and I'm going to talk to you about the real answers behind translation choices, interviewing agents involved in the translation of musical audiovisual products. Well, as you can see here, this is the content of my presentation. First, I will talk to you about the introduction, then the previous studies in the field of translation of musical text. Then I will focus on the interviews, about the corpus composition, the interviews per se, and the results. Finally, I will give you some conclusions, and you could see also the references that I used to for this study. So, well, first of all, I would like to start with a quote by Peter Law that says, "When a song will be performed in a language unfamiliar to most of the audience, some kind of translation must occur, because otherwise the verbal elements of the song will be lost. They may not be totally lost, since a good performance can communicate something of the song's mood, but they will be largely lost. Those who say, 'I don't understand Spanish, but I understand that song,' are mistaken." Well, I chose this specific quote because it's really simple. It's really straightforward. It's really simple, and also was a kind of the inspiration that I needed to pursue this specific study. So, why I decided to conduct the interviews that I'm going to talk to you about, and why I decided to focus the interviews on a specific corpus database. So, some years ago, I was interested in the translation of the musical TV series Glee, since basically I was a huge fan of the series, but I used to watch it in original version. So I decided to start watching it in Spanish and see how the translation had been done. So in my research, I discovered some discrepancies between dialogue and the song translation, mainly in the DVD set that I own. The dialogues were all dubbed, but the songs were not. Most of the times where songs were neglected and they were not translated, even though the series was considered a musical series. However, I had the opportunity to interview its translator into Spanish, María José Aguirre de Cárcer, and what was my surprise when she told me that, in fact, she had translated all the songs that the characters sang in the series. So her translation brief was for TV. So that could be the problem, and that could be the source of the gap between what she originally did, and what I have in my possession. So for that reason, I wanted to keep researching and to find if Glee was the only audiovisual production with that gap in the translation chain or not. That's why I chose a corpus based on teen audiovisual music productions translated into Spanish, as you will see later on the presentation. Well, so as you can imagine, the translation of musical text has received little attention from scholars until recently. According to Mateo, one reason for this may be the methodological challenges that its study entails, for it redraws traditional boundaries such as those between translation, adaptation, or rewriting, or it questions essential concepts such as authorship and source text, and it clearly calls for a multidisciplinary approach. So, the appearance of new audiovisual translation modes in the last decade, such as subtitling or dubbing, has brought up other elements to discuss regarding music and text, because also the image is there to play a role. So, specialists such as Peter Law and Franson apply functionalist approaches to this translation field. Song translation should be revolved around the translation scopus and the audience of the target text. Therefore, image is a factor to have in mind in the translation of musical texts, and this is evident in the case, for instance, of musical films or series that, like the ones we are gonna see today in this presentation, where music and lyrics are always connected to what is happening on the screen. So it's true that, however, before the research was little, more and more in the last decades, authors such as Gorlé, Johan Franson, Peter Lowe, de Blanche, or Mateo, among others, have produced research that has gone some way to redressing the lack of publication in previous years, as you can see here. Well, this literature that I had just mentioned is the foundation of my present study. Due to the lack of information about song translation, I wanted to dig into it and get more information and more data specifically from the original sources. Since it's true that there was information, but there was a lot of theoretical research, but there was a gap between theory and what was really happening in the field of song translation. So, as you can see here, when I started interviewing experts, I came across some limitations. First of all, the original corpus that I thought about was composed by more than 30 audiovisual products, and that originally will involve more than 50 agents, such as producers and distributors, translators, dialogue adapters, and dubbing directors, and so on. And I try to contact them through emails, LinkedIn, or other social networks, professional social networks. I try to contact them through other connections, as other translators who were willing to help me in my, in these requests, right? In this quest, of translators. And so, however, only 20% out of total were willing to participate in the study, and finally, just 16% out of the agents involved were interviewed, and these 80% were interviewed regarding 19 audiovisual productions that were the ones in which they had been taking part. So these interviews were conducted through questionnaires, Google form questionnaires, and were designed with closed and open questions. And also these questionnaires were if they wanted followed by an oral interview, just to clarify some aspect from the questionnaire or some extra information that they could give me. And well, basically the corpus composition was, as I said, audiovisual production, but basically American or United States audiovisual productions whose protagonists were or are teenagers, more or less from 12 to 18 years old, and whose songs played an important role in the story consistently. They didn't have to be musicals, like considered musicals per se, but their songs should take an important part in the film. Okay, so maybe they were sung or they were through concerts or whatever. Okay, songs had a real meaning in the plot. And well, as I told you before, although the original corpus was based on more than 30 productions, only specialists involved in 19 audiovisual products agreed to take part in the study. So as you can see here, there were 17 films, some sagas like High School Musical, The Descendants, or Camp Rock were involved, and 2 series, okay, like you can see here, Hannah Montana and Glee. And as you can also see here, the study was into Spanish. I mean, the translation into Spanish. So, the questions that I'm going to brought up the attention here were regarding translation brief, song translation strategies, factors behind the choice of translation strategies, song translations and target audience, and finally song translation past and future in audiovisual translation. So, one of the most important questions that I wanted to ask them was regarding the translation brief, because this is something that, that is really important to know about, because translation briefs usually are not out to be seen, in the public, in the general public. So I was really interested about what specifically where you said, where you asked to do. So they told me that basically the instructions were the same during the whole process. They were consistent. So they didn't have any problem with the translation brief per se. So that is fantastic to know about. So translation brief, the changes were inexistent, really. And then I also was interested to know which kind of strategies did they ask to pursue, to apply in these productions. And they told me that 50% of them told me that they were told to translate for subtitling. And 10% were told in these specific productions to translate for dubbing. And 30% out of them told me that they were asked not to translate the songs of the productions. And well, there also was a 10% who told me that they didn't remember. As you can imagine, there are some films that are date back like 20 years ago, kind of. So that most of them had to sign really important and disclosure agreements and all that. So even though they worked a lot on those commissions, some of them even don't have the information in their own computers, because once the project is finished, they had to delete or eliminate everything that has to do with the work that they did. So for some of them, they didn't have any record of that. So, and they didn't want it, they didn't want me to have fake data. So they said, okay, Belén, I don't know, I don't really remember. Okay. And then I asked them specifically in general, not just in these productions, but in general. And they told me that 80% of them told me that songs should be translated only if they are strictly related to the plot and if they have really real meaning in the story. And also they told me that usually songs are translated when they are sung by characters. So usually diegetic songs are translated, and specifically in musicals, in the films or series that are considered musicals per se, such as High School Musical, Camp Rock, for example. And in other productions, like for example Confessions of a Teen Drama Queen or Dirty Dancing of a Night, songs were not taken into account per se, because they were songs that appeared in the background or just to set the mood of the scene. So the meaning for them wasn't really important for the plot. So they weren't asked to translate that, and most of them told me that really, if they were also their choice, they wouldn't have translated that either. Also, I asked them about specifically first the factors behind the translation that they did for these 19 specific productions, and they told me that all of them told me that the ones who decided how to translate and when to translate were the client, the distributors, and the producers. They didn't have per se a say in the matter. And then I also asked them in general about the factors behind the choice of translation strategies, but in general, not just in these specific productions. And they told me that, most of them, huge part of them, 37% out of them told me that were due to distribution and format, TV, cinema, DVD, Blu-ray, and all that. And then 25% told me that it was also due to media impact, and it was strictly related to the next factor, that is economic factors. Because if the customer, the client, if the project was huge, as a huge impact in media impact, also that meant that they had a lot of money to spend. So also the details were better taken care of. So if they have more money, they dedicated more money on the task of translating songs. And then also I asked, because I don't know if you remember that at the beginning I mentioned Scopus, target audience. So I also asked them if they thought that the target audience was taken into account regarding the translation of songs. And in general, 90% out of them told me that yes. But then I asked them specifically about teenage films and series, and just 50% out of them told me that yes. Songs were taken into account regarding this group of age. And then finally, I asked them specifically about other group of age, such as children under 12 years old, and all of them told me that songs for these specific groups are usually translated, especially dubbed, such as in Disney movies or series. And then I also asked them to think about the future of song translation, and if they think that it will be really positive or not. And 25% told me that yes, they will think that will be positive changes, especially now regarding with new new channels, like, or new ways of consuming the visual products, such as Netflix, HBO, these platforms. Others told me that 37% told me that they will remain the same. It won't be any changes, really. There won't be any changes. It will be the same. 30% out of them told me that it will be depending on the demand and trends, and in a way it will be keeping a little bit random in terms of the decisions will be taken by the company, not always will be. And finally, I will have just to wrapping up, talking about some conclusions. As you can see here, the current research states the translator of an audiovisual musical product is just one of the first links in the translation chain, but definitely not one who has the last word. Client, dialogue adapter, dubbing directors, dubbing actors, or even lyricists that we didn't talk about in this specific study, but they also, for some productions, are really important too in the decisions, are part of the translation assembly line too. So we have to think about the factors behind every translation move and every translation result. And also we have to take into account the scopus, the audience needs, and the sound translation regarding those needs. And then also we have to take into account the gaps in the translation chains. Not only is we all the time, or the general public tend to think about the translation is the one to blame, but as we know here, the translation is just, the translator is just the first link in that translation chain, but not the last one. So we need to think about the distribution, the different formats, the lack of communication between links, between agents in the same chain. And also, finally, I would like just to think about the future research in other audiovisual fields that should be conducted, and I will keep working on it, because I think that is really important to keep contributing in this research, in this study, right? So anyway, thank you so much for all your attention. Here you have some references to check out, and they are the main references in which I base my study. And well, thank you so much, and I hope that you have a really great day, and a great year too. Okay, so thank you so much for everything. Bye.